So this is the second part of the Squirrel watercolour, and again we're working from this lovely photo by Thelma Weaver, and I've filled in so far in part one some very pale burnt sienna on the squirrel, which is now dry. And to do the background, I'm now going to turn this upside down and just check that that's in the correct place on the video. And I would turn this picture upside down as well to help me. And the reason is we're going to start on the line of where he's sitting. We're going to work our way round and down and over the tail and then down the other side, turning the picture as we go. And I've made up for this some sap green on its own and sap green with cadmium yellow. And the first bit of colour, this is our pale tone, is the sap green with cadmium yellow, and I'm going to put this on. Now remember, when you're doing a wash, it's not a race. You can go back to your colour any number of times. It's not a case of trying to spread that colour as far as possible. We're going to put this neatly to my line. I've made my line very pale. And this colour will go on relatively pale. For the twiddly bits, you might want to change to a finer brush, so just round the squirrel. Just going to take a little bit of trouble, just keeping my eye all the time on that line and making sure it's not drying. So we're just filling it in there. Go back to my large brush for a moment and just catch this up. So again, there's no limit to the number of times that you can go back to your colour. Just keep going back when you need it. It does mean that you have to remember to make enough colour, which is always the key. So around his paw, I can see a little gap there. Just going to correct that while I can see it. And then just very carefully in this little gap between his nose and his paw. And then we can go back to the big brush. And the colour is going at that sort of angle. This is possibly slightly darker than it needed to be, because remember that if we can see it, it's mid-tone. And I can tell that this colour is green, therefore it's mid-tone. If you look at it and think, is it green? That's your pale tone. And again, before I go too far, I'm going to dab my brush off and just very lightly dip in with my tip of my brush to take off any excess that might be forming here. And I can just see a little bit there. Just take it off with the tip of the brush and then go on and carry on. And we're now going to change colour, so rinse brush out. And this is sap green on its own. And bringing this colour round, so there's no detail at this stage. Very gently round those ears. And we're now turning the corner, so we keep this line, begins to turn. And I'm going to turn the picture with me so that I can bring this colour across. And most of this top section is the sap green, so I don't need to check too carefully. Very carefully, again, maybe switch to that smaller brush for between those ears. Just be careful if you do switch brushes that you don't go thinner with your paint. So keep the small brush as charged up with paint as you did the big brush. And because I've moved about an inch ahead of myself now, I'm going to go back with the big brush and catch up, so that I never do an edge and that paint behind can dry. Just going to dab on my brush and take off this little excess that I can see forming behind me, and that just means that it can't do anything nasty, form watermarks or anything. And here, again, soft edge on this tail. And then again, making sure I've gone onto the small brush again, making sure that you keep this brush as wet as you have done the big one. If you go in thinner, so less paint on your brush, you will find that you end up with watermarks, remembering that watermarks form when fatter paint comes against thinner or drying paint. And I can make this tail more formed obviously as I go on. For the moment I'm just going to get 1 or 2 lines going into it, and we can now begin to turn correct way up. So with working this way, this can be drying behind us and we're just in control of a one edge. So I'm just twist my picture right way up, and again we've got sap green here, just bringing that colour through and then bringing it down. There is a line of paler tone, but also I've got to check on this tail. So again, remember, just go about an inch and a half ahead, and then I'm just going to use a little bit of my yellower tone for here, bringing that down, that edge, just very carefully. I'm slightly twisted with the position of the camera, so I'm sort of trying to pull across to see what I'm doing. There we are, so about an inch and a half ahead. I'm going into that yellow tone for the moment. Again, we've got a little excess at the top, so dab on the tissue, lift off with the tip of the brush and run it along. And then I'm going to go back to the sap green, and I'm just being neat into that tail. Remember where you're stopping. We also have a little section in here, and that's the bit that's easy to forget. So very carefully, could have probably done with a slightly smaller brush. And again, catching up now with the larger tone, larger brush, bringing it down. And then just being neat on that edge. Tiny bit more, just made enough paint. And just tidying up with that smaller brush near the tail. Dab on the tissue, just run the brush along to take off any excess. Do this very gently, very gently. There's still a tiny bit forming there, again, very gently with this, and tiny bit there. And then that can be allowed to dry, and that gives you your background tone. I could have been slightly paler. When that dries, it will dry paler anyway, and then we'll be able to do the bottom area. That's your next bit.